Hi, I'd like to continue our journey back to 1820 and to the coroner's court and summing up the coroner's court evidence and then going on to what the populace was doing outside while this was all going on. So we'll just continue with the examination of Mr. John Lawton. I'm a surgeon and live at Boxford. I was present when the body was viewed by the gentlemen of the jury and made as minute an examination as I could. I first took off some pieces of sack which covered it. The body was lying upon the right side, with the head forced down upon the shoulder. There was an appearance of coagulated blood upon the cheek. And there appeared to be blood upon the clothes and the handkerchiefs. The green handkerchief round the neck had been pulled tight, so that a man's hand might be put between the knot and the fold, and under it there was the appearance of a wound from a sharp instrument. But that part was so decomposed, I can only say that it had that appearance. The internal bone of the orbit of the right eye was fractured, as if a pointed instrument had been thrust into it, and the bone dividing the nose was displaced. The brain was in such a fluid state that I was unable to say whether it sustained injury or not. Such a stab as I have described might have penetrated the brain. I found no other injury in any part of the body, but there were two small portions of the bone in the throat which might have passed thither from the nose or the orbit of the eye. I think the handkerchief was drawn tight enough to have caused the death. The neck of the deceased appeared very much compressed indeed. The sack had evidently been tied after the deceased had been put in and in head first. I had the mouth of the sack in my hand. In a supplementary note it has, in a supplementary deposition since the exhumation of the body, the witness gives it as he decided opinion that a pistol ball entered the neck about the jugular vein and proceeded in an oblique direction to the eye on the opposite side of the head, which would have produced the fracture before alluded to in the orbit. Mr. Wayman, the coroner, signified that all the witnesses in attendance had been examined. Mr. Humphreys then addressed the coroner and said, "Sir, as the evidence has been gone through, I propose that my client be permitted to come into the room to hear it read." The coroner ordered the officers to be sent for and commanded them to produce Corder. During the solemn investigation, Corder had been confined to the upper room, accompanied by a constable. And when Lee told him for what purpose his presence was required below, he scarcely made a reply, but prepared to accompany the officer. Lee then ushered the prisoner into the room, properly handcuffed, and every eye was fixed upon him. He was enveloped in a large Spanish cloak, and appeared extremely exhausted and agitated. Indeed, he scarcely seemed capable of supporting himself from fainting. This being observed, the coroner ordered him a chair, and then commenced reading the evidence which had been adduced against him. Whilst the coroner was thus employed, the prisoner sometimes appeared very much agitated, and at others so absorbed in thought as to be apparently inattentive to what was passing. His mind and body seemed to be completely overwhelmed. When the dispositions taken on the Sunday when the Marten family were examined had been read, Mr. Humphreys, the solicitor, advised the prisoner to retire and confide in him for the rest, in which request the prisoner seemed willing to acquiesce. Before he left the room, the coroner addressed him and said, "William Corder, you are charged with the wilful murder of Maria Marten, and I shall be very happy to hear anything that you have to say, or listen to any evidence which you can adduce in proof of your innocence. You have heard what some of the witnesses have said against you. Therefore, you are at liberty to invalidate their testimony if you can, or be silent, as you may think proper." After advising this, his attorney, for by this time the prisoner had become more composed, he arose, and bowing to the coroner, as if to thank him for his kind advice, retired with the officer without uttering a word, and he was reconducted to his former apartment to await the verdict of the jury. So here you can see that the jury is very much like a modern jury, where you can say things to defend yourself, or you can be silent and not say anything just in case it does incriminate you. So the modern practices are very much being used here. Mr. Wayman then addressed the jury and observed that as the evidence was concluded, he would recapitulate the whole of it if they thought proper, and make such comments upon it as might appear necessary, as he deemed no exertion of his own too great in an affair of such momentous importance. That a murder had been committed there could not be the least possible doubt, and by what instrument or weapon the deceased came by her death, but merely to say whether there had been sufficient evidence to convince them that the prisoner was the murderer. Mr. Green, the foreman, having confirmed with his brother jurors, informed the coroner that they did not wish him to read the evidence. They begged to be allowed to retire to consider their verdict. The jury were then conducted to a separate room, where they remained for about half an hour, and on their return the coroner inquired whether they were agreed. The foreman said, "Yes," unanimously. Return a verdict of wilful murder against William Corder. The coroner immediately issued his warrant, directed to Mr. Aldridge, the governor of the Bury Jail, to receive the prisoner into his custody, and him safely to keep until he was brought to trial at the assizes of the jail delivery for the county of Suffolk, then next ensuing. So there we have the end of the coroner's meeting, and they've found there is sufficient evidence for William Corder to be taken, and a real trial to be taken at Bury. Now, while this investigation was carrying on, we'll see what this reporter says about what the populace around about were doing. Disgraceful conduct of the peasantry. During the time the coroner and the jury were sitting to hear evidence upon this solemn and important investigation, the conduct of the peasantry and rabble in and about the Cock public house was to me most indecent and disgusting description. In all probability, Polstead Green never, even at the time when the fair is held, presented such a motley and disorderly group of beings. Upon such an occasion as this, it was to be expected that amid all the bustle and anxiety which were unavoidable, there would at least have been something like outward decency of deportment, especially as the populace had only to turn their heads to behold the building where the unhappy victim lost her life. The inquiry being instituted to ascertain whether the son of an aged and respectable widow, living at a short distance, was or was not a murderer, ought to have taught the populace at least to respect her feelings. But instead of this, all was riot and confusion. The manners of the people were such as would have induced a stranger unacquainted with what had transpired to have believed that they had assembled for the purpose of hilarity and mirth, rather than to witness a judicial inquiry as to the means by which a fellow creature was deprived of life. An inquiry, too, upon the results of which the existence of another fellow creature was suspended. In one of the rooms, situated near to that in which the coroner and the jury were performing their important duties, a large party assembled and amused themselves in singing noisy and objectionable songs and exhibiting other symptoms of boisterous mirth. Such was their conduct that Mr. Gordon, the intelligent host of the Cock Inn, declared himself quite disgusted with the nuisance, which it was impossible for him to abate, much less suppress. He was sorry to be under the necessary recording this fact, because we have always been taught to believe that the peasantry of this country were proverbial for their kindness of feeling and simplicity of manner, which are so beautifully described by the immutable Suffolk poet Robert Bloomfield. Had that important bard lived to have seen such a negative given to his poetic effusions, he would have shrunk back with horror. Or, had he beheld his countrymen on the present occasion, we shall not have been surprised to have heard him exclaim, as he did when his farmer's boy was translated into Latin, "Hi, Giles, in what new garb art dressed?" Solemn visitations of the province like these ought to have the effect of exciting reflection and commiseration, instead of being turned into an occasion for tumult, drunkenness, and debauchery. Right, I'll leave that one there, and then next one we'll continue, and we got the departure of the prisoner from Polstead to the Bury jail, and then following on his trip to becoming hanged at Bury. So we'll continue next time. That's his going to Bury jail, and then a little narrative about Maria Marten herself. Thank you for listening. I hope you're still enjoying this. It's a new beginning of the journal of the reporters of England going out and getting stories for papers and magazines. Prior to this, there wasn't that much. First of all, there was not many papers around because there wasn't the middling classes that could read them. And so most of it was mainly religious, or religious sermons had been done, or propaganda from the government. Very little of this new type of journalism where they're going out seeking out stories to put into papers and journals to bring the public into, to show them what was happening. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up if you're still continuing with this, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.